Hey everyone, welcome back for some more Standard here on MTG Arena. And today I am showcasing an original brew here in my favorite color, which is black. It has always been my favorite color in Magic for the over 15 years that I've been playing this game. The first modern deck I ever made back in 2012, I want to say, maybe it was 2011, was a mono black mid-range deck using Phyrexian Obliterator. So I'm very excited to be showcasing a mid-range deck in my favorite color. Mono black is already an established archetype in Standard. There's an aggro version that kind of has a bit of a skeleton synergy, usually using Corpses of the Lost and Forsaken Miner. But the mid-range build using Unholy Annex is certainly one that's already been in Standard pretty much since this card came out. And it's still one that's played today, but it's not as strong as the ones that we had before rotation. There was a mono black deck that was really strong using Lolth, Spider Queen, and then Blood on the Snow and a whole bunch of removal spells and cheap creatures. But I personally didn't enjoy playing that one quite as much, even though black is my favorite color. Then, of course, as soon as Unholy Annex came out, we had the big demon package, Archfiend of the Dross, and obviously Shoulder of the Apocalypse was also in that deck, and Bloodletter of Akhlazotz, which is still in Standard. But once rotation happened with the release of Edge of Eternities, that version of mono black lost a lot of cards, especially the most notably Shouldered and Archfiend of the Dross. Those were two really big losses, but obviously it lost things like Go for the Throat, Shoulder's Edict, and stuff like that as well, Cut Down. So ever since then, even though mono black is still played with Bloodletter of Akhlazotz and Unholy Annex and Unstoppable Slasher, it's kind of like middle of the tier 2. Now, as you can see, there's no Unstoppable Slashers here in the main deck list because this is a very different approach to mono black, using a new card from Avatar as its centerpiece. And I will talk about that card in a little bit. Let me start talking about the cards. So there are 4 copies of Fairy Dream Thief in this deck. People still have not gotten the memo. Fairy Dream Thief is such a good card. It is one of the best 1-drops in black. It's a 1/1 flyer for 1 mana, but when it enters, you get to surveil. It can help you find a land, or if you have too many lands, it can help you surveil away a land. It can help you find a piece of removal or whatever it is that you need. But also, if it dies, if it's in the graveyard, you can exile it for 3 mana, draw a card, and you lose 1 life. There is so much value from this one creature. For one thing, if you surveil another Dream Thief on top, just put that Dream Thief in the graveyard, and now you can still get value from it by exiling it and drawing a card off it. But there's a bit more synergy here with this card in this specific deck that I'm going to get to a little bit later. 4 copies of Deep Cavern Bats. This creature is so important right now. It can take away whatever combo piece your opponent is holding, or if you're on the play, you can potentially take a Badger Mole Cub before your opponent has a chance to put it on the battlefield. That's one of the most powerful. That might be the most powerful card in Avatar, honestly. You can take a piece of removal, you can take a counterspell, whatever it is, take away the primary engine. This card is just so important in the current meta. Now let me get to the star of the show. Raven Eagle from Avatar. This is a 3 mana, 2/3 flyer. But when it enters or attacks, you exile a target card from a graveyard. If it's a creature card, you create a clue token. So this has just built-in graveyard hate, and it happens when it enters. So even if it gets removed later, you can still potentially exile that Bringer of the Last Gift from your opponent's graveyard. Or Bloodghast if they're trying to do the Golgari combo. Or an Overlord of the Boiler Bilges if they're playing Yuna. Graveyard hate is so important in this meta. There's also another Golgari one that is using Foggy Swamp Visions to cheat in a Crater Hoof. You can potentially exile that before your opponent is able to put it on the field. So this thing just hard counters so many decks in the current meta. But it goes a bit further, because the last bit of text is whenever you draw your second card each turn, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. So obviously you can exile a creature from a graveyard, you get a clue token, you can sack that clue, and then that's your second card, your opponent loses 1 life, you gain 1 life, right? But it goes so much further than that, because black has a lot of card draw in the form of Elegy Acolyte and Unholy Annex. So now if I have this eagle on the field, Once I draw my second card, either off of Acolyte or Annex, then they're going to lose 1 life. And not only that, I gain 1 life. So it offsets the lose 1 life from the Elegy Acolyte, and it offsets the lose 2 life, by 1. I only lose 1 life off of the Annex if I don't have a demon in play. Now, if I do have a demon in play, like let's say I open up the Ritual Chamber, my opponent's going to lose 2 life off of the Annex from the demon, but then they're also going to lose another life off of the Eagle. So that's 3 life. And if I have Bloodletter of Aclazotz in play instead, it's 6 life. 6 life just off of the end step triggers, and I get an extra card off the Annex, obviously. This Eagle just makes these card draw effects even better. They were already good. It's already good that you get to draw a card off the Acolyte. It's already good that you get to draw a card off of Unholy Annex, but it's now even better off of the Eagle. It also synergizes with Fairy Dream Thief. See, I have 4 copies of Dream Thief in here, not only because of the surveilling and flying and all, it's because of this other ability. Now, if I have a Dream Thief in the graveyard and an Eagle on the field, I can draw a card off of Dream Thief, which is great. I get an extra card, but then my opponent loses a life, and it offsets the life loss that I would have taken from the Dream Thief. This Eagle is just straight up a good card. It is just good value on rate, and it synergizes really well with these other card draw effects. But there's an added synergy here with Elegy Acolyte, because the Clue token, if you sack it, that triggers Void. So if I have an Elegy Acolyte on the field, I draw my card off of the Eagle, my opponent loses a life, I gain a life, I draw a card, but then I can sack the Clue, and then I get to make a robot token. This card just fits so well into black. It synergizes with everything. It even synergizes with Tragic Trajectory, because you can trigger Void off of the Clue token and now something gets -10/-10. If the Eagle sticks around, then you attack with it, you can exile another creature, and then there's more graveyard hate if you need that, or you just repeat the process, right? You get another Clue token. You can then trigger Void with Acolyte, or you just draw a card off of Acolyte, draw a card off of Annex, drain them again. It is just... the value pretty much never stops with this deck. You just keep getting cards, and as long as your opponent doesn't just have this big explosive turn, like I actually lost a game where my opponent top decked Erase the Past and I didn't have a Strategic Betrayal at the time to exile the graveyard, and they won that turn. They did like 16 damage to me or something like that with Sephiroth by sacking all their stuff. But as long as that doesn't happen, you're just going to outvalue your opponents. You just keep getting cards, and then you just keep draining them for life, and then just keep removing their creatures. It is just crazy when this deck works really well together. I have an extra card, I'm draining my opponent, I'm holding up removal, I have flyers. Look at all these creatures, they're all flying, except for the Elegy Acolyte. The demon is flying. All of these are flyers. They can all get in for damage, which means that they can draw a card off of the Acolyte because they're evasive. But it's also about just getting in for damage. The Dream Thief and the Bat, look, they only have 1 power, right? So they don't hit a lot. Well, they hit a lot harder with the Bloodletter in play. I had a game where I won. My opponent was at 16 life. I opened up the Ritual Chamber. The next turn, I played the Bloodletter and I won because I did 16 damage. It was 12 off of the 6/6 demon and then 4 with the Annex drain. And they basically had no board. I think they had like 1 creature in play because I was just removing all their stuff. Speaking of that, I guess I'll talk briefly about the removal. So it's no surprise that any mono black deck is going to play tons of removal, right? So I put an assortment in here that fits the curve pretty nicely. So I am including copies of Stab. I don't think Stab is a very good card, but there are a lot of weak creatures that are being played in the standard meta right now to set up bigger plays, and if you can just remove that creature, it slows your opponent down a little bit. I'm also main decking 2 copies of Duress. I really think that this is worth it. There are so many decks that use, not necessarily every deck is full of non-creature spells like control decks are, but many of those non-creature spells are very important, like an Awaken the Honored Dead, or a Kaito, or Raise the Past, or Sheltered by Ghosts, or another removal spell, right? So I really think that it's worth main decking Duress in the current standard meta. I'm also main decking Strategic Betrayal because, hey, so many decks using the graveyard, right? I have more of these in the sideboard, but there's a lot of good graveyard hate in here between the Raven Eagle and the Strategic Betrayal. I only have 1 copy of Arch Enemy's Charm in here because, for one thing, even though this is a mono black deck, this card is still hard to cast. I mean, look, if you get 1 Soulstone Sanctuary in your first 3 turns, then you're not able to cast this on rate, right? You have to wait until you get another swamp. And not only that, I do think that 3 mana for removal spell, even though it exiles, it really is slow. the current standard meta is ridiculously fast, and these 2 mana removal spells are just so much more important than the 3 mana. But I do still have one in here. It works really well against Kaido, Enduring Curiosity, Enduring Innocence, right? All those creatures that just come back. Or if you need to just exile something because it has a death trigger and you don't want that death trigger to happen. Heartless Act has also been reprinted. This is now part of the Avatar set. And I do think that this removal spell is normally really good, except in the current standard meta, there are so many creatures that get +1/+1 counters, or just counters of some kind. It doesn't even necessarily need to be +1/+1 counters. So as it is right now, I don't think Heartless Act is quite as strong as it could be. In different metas, this is just an excellent removal spell because it's less likely the creatures will have counters. But I'm running more copies of Shoot the Sheriff. And see, the main thing with Shoot the Sheriff is that it doesn't kill everything, right? And for one thing, I forgot to mention this, the Eagle is an assassin. The Eagle is an assassin. It's an outlaw. It doesn't die to Shoot the Sheriff, right? Fairy Dream Thief is a warlock. It doesn't die to Shoot the Sheriff. Now, Fairy Dream Thief is one you wouldn't necessarily mind your opponent wasting a Shoot the Sheriff on, but the Eagle's an assassin, right? So it can't be targeted with Shoot the Sheriff. It has to be targeted with something else. But I'm running more copies of Bitter Triumph than Heartless Act. The Bitter Triumph is not, I usually just pay the 3 life on this, and it's not so bad because look, the Deep Cavern Bat has lifelink, the LG Acolyte has lifelink, you can potentially gain life off the Annex, you can potentially gain life off the Eagle, right? Paying the 3 life is generally not such a big deal. I have 25 lands in here and only 3 copies of Soulstone Sanctuary. I mean, you could make it 4 and take out this Demolition Field, but I think the Demolition Field is just worth it. There's a lot of creature lands, so many decks play Soulstone Sanctuary, and also now that Badger Mole Cub is in the meta, you might just want to blow up one of those lands. Granted, they get the land back, but at least it's not a creature anymore. And then 21 Swamps between the Artemis Charm and the Bloodletters and just everything being black. You know, it's just so important to have black mana, untapped black mana. There were some situations where I had a Soulstone and a Swamp and it wasn't enough. I needed 2 blacks, you know, to be able to like duress and stab on the same turn or something like that. So just having tons of swamps make it as efficient, as reliable as possible. And as you can see, this is 25 lands in total. Now, 25 might seem like a lot. The curve actually isn't that expensive since, you know, you can cast just Unholy Annex for 3 mana, right? And then the Demon is 5 mana. And with the Dream Thief, you can potentially surveil to try to find your land. You draw cards off the Acolyte, the Annex, and all this stuff. But really, truthfully, I tried 24 lands in this deck for a long time, and it just didn't feel right. There were situations where I was stuck on 2 lands, or I was stuck on 3 lands, and I just wasn't able to play more than 1 spell in a turn. And it really did bring me down a little bit. Like if I have an Annex and that's like the only thing I played, if I had 1 more land, I could have Annexed and Duressed, right? I could have Annexed and Trajectoried or whatever. I could have Eagled and Stabbed. You know what I mean? Like just continually having a land every turn as often as possible is really important for this deck. The sideboard has taken a lot of work, but it kind of is what you might expect. 2 more copies of the Resonator, 2 copies of Intimidation Tactics. This is so important, y'all. Intimidation Tactics is such an important card. Get rid of those combo pieces. It's also really good against Jeskai artifacts or any artifact deck, Izzet artifacts, etc. 2 copies of Strategic Betrayal, no surprises there. 1 more copy of Archenemy's Charm. This gets sideboarded in if my opponent is playing Enduring Innocence, Enduring Curiosity, right? Stuff like that. Or again, just something that I don't want to have a death trigger. I do feel like this slot could be something else though. It does feel like, because again, the 3 mana for removal, it's just very slow. So this could be something else. Actually, for a while, I had Rush of Dread in here, and that's actually potentially a good card. So maybe you could replace this Artemis Charm with the Rush of Dread. And the reason why I had it in there was for life gain decks, because obviously with Rush of Dread and Bloodletter of Aklazats, that's a 1-turn kill, right? They just automatically lose no matter how much life they have. So that's potentially something that could go in here. 2 copies of Nowhere to Run. This is good for Dimir midrange. It's also really good for the Kona decks. It's also pretty good against decks that run green because they might run protection spells and you could potentially get rid of an Ouroboros before it gets the trigger, right, and gets big. 2 copies of Sunset Saboteur. These go in against control decks and also Dimir midrange. Dimir midrange is a very interactive deck, so this penalizes your opponent for interacting with the Saboteur, right, because they have to discard a card. 2 copies of Slasher. So let me talk for a little while about Slasher here, because I don't have Slasher in the main deck, right? Obviously, the combo here with Slasher is that if you have Bloodletter on the field and you hit them with Slasher, they lose, right? It's a one-turn kill because they lose all of their life total. However, I personally don't think that Slasher is that strong in the current meta. There are so many decks that run so many creatures, and so many creatures that people are okay chump blocking with. Like, I'll chump block with my Town Gate, or I'll chump block with my Earthbended Land that just comes back onto the battlefield anyway, or I'll chump block with my Llanowar Elves and all this stuff. There are just so many creatures. And between Flippage Drowners and Beast Spiders and all this stuff, like, this Slasher it's very unlikely in the current landscape that this Slasher is actually going to get to hit your opponent. Decks are just making tons of creatures, multiple creatures in a turn, multiple tokens in a turn. You know, tokens deck is seeing a bit more play. So I just don't think that Slasher provides the same potential as it used to. That being said, I do have 2 copies of Slasher in here because this is an excellent creature to put in against control decks. For one thing, yes, it could potentially kill them in a single turn, but it kind of gets around removal. You know, if they use a board wipe, well, Slasher is going to come back. And if they want to get rid of it, they have to waste another removal spell on it. I also put this in against life gain decks, right? For the same reason why I was saying you might want to put in Rush of Dread. Rounding out the sideboard is another new card for Avatar, which is Day of Black Sun. This is a really good card. I'm very glad that this has been added to the set. Each creature with mana value X or less loses all abilities until end of turn and destroy those creatures. That first part about losing all abilities is so important. Any creatures with death triggers, so like Orzhov Aristocrats, none of those death triggers happen. You can potentially just pay X equals 0, so this is just a 2 mana board wipe against artifacts if they have multiple construct tokens in play or any other tokens deck. This is just a really good addition to the set, a really good addition to black. And for what it's worth, if you want to just pay 3 mana for this, right, like X equals 1, and it doesn't matter if your Fairy Dream Thieves die, right, because you get to still get value from them if they're in the graveyard. There are it's pretty much 2 things that you need to be careful of with this card, though. So one is getting rid of your Deep Cavern Bat, right? If you have something underneath there that you don't want to give back to them, then you might not be able to cast this for X equals 2, which it may not provide enough value because if your opponent has a bunch of 2 mana stuff that you want to get rid of, right? But also, you do want to be careful with your Soulstone Sanctuaries and the Demon from the Annex, because both of these are X equals 0, right? They don't have a mana cost. So if you say X equals 0 and you have these on the field, they're going to go away as well. So that could potentially hurt you pretty bad. So you do need to be a little bit careful with this, the timing of it. So obviously, this version of Mono Black is different from others that you'll find. There's no Unstoppable Slasher in the main. And there's a few other cards that could be in the main deck that other people might play that I'm not doing. So for one thing, Sunset Saboteur is not in the main deck. Neither is Cecil, right? So I don't have Cecil. I don't have Sunset Saboteur. I don't even have like a Demon Wall, right? So that might be a little bit weird, but I took a bit of a different approach with this Mono Black build. I went very removal heavy. Look at all of this interaction, right? All of this interaction and removal. And I did that because their creature decks are just very strong right now. And if you're playing like a Demon Wall or a Cecil or even a Sunset Saboteur, it might not provide enough value for you. You know, it might be better to just play more removal. So that's the approach that I took with this deck. You'll also notice that there's no Preacher of the Schism. I personally don't think that Preacher is that good of a card right now. I think it used to be, but right now with the release of Avatar, I don't think Preacher is that strong. You know, a 2/4 for 3 mana that doesn't do anything when it enters. It at least has Death Touch and it's a decent blocker. If you attack in with it, sure, you might be able to draw a card off it. Sure, you might be able to make a 1/1 lifelink token, but if your opponent just has this huge board of all these really powerful creatures, or they're about to play a Flippage Drowner and tap down your guy, or play a Kaido, or Enduring Curiosity, or they're about to reanimate a Bringer of the Last Gift, or whatever, like, it doesn't matter that you're playing that Preacher. It's totally irrelevant. So I'm not sure if Preacher's in a really good place right now. I think Preacher fits better into a more aggressive deck, where you can get these other creatures down earlier that your opponent might need to deal with. And then you can potentially draw some cards off of Preacher, and then it can provide some more value. Another card that's not here, that I did have in here for a long time, was Karsi Revenant. It's a 3/3 flyer with lifelink, and flying is good for this deck because it can get in for damage, right? Which is important for LG Acolyte, important for Bloodletter and all that stuff. And the lifelink is also relevant, right? If you're playing a bit of a slower deck, this is a bit of a slower deck, and you might need to gain that life back. However, I was finding that even though Karsi Revenant is a good card, The turns when I was playing it, I would have rather just had a piece of removal. So instead of Karsi Revenant, I just decided to play more removal because that's what I really wanted the turn that I was playing the Karsi Revenant. So that is the deck. It is very synergistic. And when it's all clicking, it just works extremely well. It's not gonna, aside from like having a demon and then an Akkozats on the field, right? You're not really gonna chunk your opponent for tons of damage. That's just not how the deck works. It's about outvaluing your opponents and then having answers for their stuff and then just kind of grinding them, right? Playing a war of attrition and then coming out on top. A much different flavor of deck in the current standard landscape. Let's move on to the gameplay. I have 4 matches that I want to show you. I hope you all enjoy. All right, here's my opening hand for the first game of the first match. And this is very keepable. Starting with a Fairy Dream Thief. And there's a Deep Cavern Bat on top, which is also really good. And with them playing a Restless Anchorage, I thought they might be a control deck. But as you can see from their hand, that is not the case. This is kind of... I wasn't really sure what to call this. You know, it's not quite Azorius Flyers, which is kind of a deck that's gotten popular with Aang and like Momo and the Quantum Riddler and the other stuff like that, Spyglass Siren. But that's not what this is. So it seems to be some kind of it's not really Azorius aggro either, right? It seems kind of just like a mid-range deck. So I decided to take the Aang. I think the other good option there was to take the No More Lies, but I'm kind of figuring that I can just try to work around that. But the Aang could be a problem because it can deal with my creatures. So if my opponent gets stuck on 2 lands for a little bit, then you know, the only thing they can really do is the No More Lies. I'm actually expecting that they'll probably just use the Consult the Star charts here to find a 3rd land. But Aang is an interesting card. There's been a lot of builds, Azorius and Bant, utilizing that version of Aang. So my opponent is going to consult to find their 3rd land. And they're going to warp Quantum Riddler, so I am certainly going to get rid of that with Shoot the Sheriff. And now I can run out the Bloodletter of Akkozats, which is good. You know, it doesn't get countered, and now I can hit for tons of damage. Also, the Bloodletter is technically not a triggered ability. It's just part of the text. So it can't be countered with Tidebinder, which is pretty good for me. So my opponent passes, holding up Tidebinder and No More Lies, and I just do a stab. So at this point, it feels like I should, if I attack here, they're going to activate the Restless Anchorage, but I have the Demolition Field in play. I decided to attack first, but I probably should have just activated the Demolition Field right away and gotten rid of that Restless Anchorage. But I guess in this case, they get to at least use, they had to use the mana to activate the Anchorage, but what they're going to do now is they're going to tap the Anchorage for mana, and then they'll obviously go get a land when the Anchorage is destroyed, right? So the land is going to come in untapped. So now they actually have 2 mana available. So they could seemingly have it for the No More Lies, right? If I try to cast something, but they actually had a Get Lost as well. So that was a really good heads up play for my opponent to be aware and notice that they could still have the mana available, right? To cast the Get Lost. So now that I have these 2 map tokens, I'm certainly going to use them. And typically what I'll do is I'll spread. I don't want to... It feels better to put the counters on Fairy Dream Thief because Deep Cavern Bat is already a good target for removal, right? Because it has the Aang underneath. And whatever Deep Cavern Bat has, any Deep Cavern Bat, is automatically a good target for removal. So this way you're spreading the threats. So now your opponent has to decide, am I going to remove this other 3/3 creature, or am I going to remove the bat? The flip side of that is that if you buff up the bat, then you gain more life when it does damage, right? But I typically like to do it this way. I have 23 life anyway, for one thing. But I typically like to do it this way, right? Spread out the effort, right? Spread out the threat. So they play this Margot, and I can certainly play Stab, and I'm going to, because I want to see if I can get this Normalize out of my opponent's hand. So they didn't cast Normalize, which means now I unfortunately can't cast LG Acolyte, right? And they knew I had the Acolyte on top anyway, because they saw it. So again, good heads up play from my opponent. My opponent's just going to hold up mana again, and I just drew a Tragic Trajectory. But I have been doing incremental damage here. You know, they're down to 7 life, and if I swing here and they don't remove one of my creatures, then they're going to go down to 3. My opponent's going to draw and discard with a 3 steps ahead. They can obviously still cast No More Lies. And they discarded the Tidebinder. So now what I'm thinking is I might just cast the Elegy Acolyte. I know that they're going to counter it with No More Lies, but what am I going to do? Just not play anything and just always play? Like, at least this way I forced them to use the Normalize, and I already have lethal damage in the air, technically. So it feels like forcing them to, or making them use the counterspell on the LG Acolyte here when I could draw like an Unholy Annex, right? I could draw something else. It just feels like, why not, right? And at this point. My opponent casts a Spyglass Siren. And a Sheltered by Ghosts. So that's not so bad as long as the Spyglass Siren is the only creature, because I can just remove it with Strategic Betrayal. I can also remove it with Tragic Trajectory because I can just easily pay the ward, but if I have to cast Tragic Trajectory and the ward, then if they have another Normalize, I can't get rid of it, right? So seemingly Strategic Betrayal would be better here if they don't play another creature. And they did not. So it's possible that they have a flash creature. But I figured I can just try the Strategic Betrayal. If they flash something else in, then I still have the mana available to get rid of the Siren, to pay the ward. There it all goes. I get back my Dream Thief. I get to Surveil again. And there's another Bat on top. I'm thinking that's actually probably okay to keep, because I'm very close to winning the game here, right? So incremental damage in the air with Flyers seems pretty good, and I might be able to get something out of their hand that is like another Sheltered or something like that. Now they cast a Floodpitch Drowner to tap down my Bats, but I will be able to remove it with Tragic Trajectory. I did think for a second here, because I can activate the Sanctuary, right? But I didn't want them to shuffle away my Bat and get back the ring. So I decided, yeah, let me just get rid of the Floodpitch Drowner. So unfortunately, I don't have enough mana to activate the Sanctuary and play the Bat at the same time. That's another reason why I paused to cast that Tragic Trajectory. So now my opponent didn't play anything. There's no way that they're going to let me win the game here, right? There's absolutely no way. So I'm activating the Sanctuary first, and there's Stick on their side. So they have something. So because they had something, I was actually thinking, well, why would I attack here? They're obviously not going to let me win. They would just concede. So I'm debating actually not attacking with the Soulstone and then just playing the Bat. So at least this way the Soulstone is animated, and I could see what happened if there was any stick, and there was, and now I can play the Bat instead of attacking with the Soulstone. Because if it's Floodpitch Drowner, they would have tapped down my Soulstone, and then I wouldn't be able to play the Bat. And that is what happens. They do have a Floodpitch Drowner. And an Enduring Curiosity. So this is actually a bit of an issue, because they're going to be able to draw cards off this, right? They can tap down my creature, and then the only thing that will be back as a blocker is this Deep Cavern Bat. So my opponent is definitely, I'm definitely not, my opponent definitely still has a fighting chance here. They've tapped down my other Deep Cavern Bat that has the Ang underneath it, so they can shuffle that away. So now I was actually wondering if I should attack with this Dream Thief, because if I don't, then I have 2 blockers, right? And if Dream Thief goes in the graveyard, I can draw a card off of it. So I was wondering if I should just leave it back as a blocker, but I'm so close to winning. It really felt like at this point, every point of damage was gonna matter. My opponent's gonna attack with both creatures, and obviously, if I try to block the Floodpitch Drowner with the Bat, then they're just going to shuffle it away and shuffle away my other Bat. But I'm thinking that I should probably still just do that. I was also wondering, like, well, if I don't try to block the Floodpitch Drowner, are they still going to shuffle it away? And they absolutely would, right? That's just kind of one quick thing I was thinking. So it definitely seems like it's in my best interest to block here. But this is really interesting. You know, my opponent has an interesting deck and they're holding on, you know, despite my strong advantage and my big swing in life total here. But still, this is a really interesting game. So they are going to shuffle away the Bat to get back their Ang. They play a land. And that's it. And I drew an Unholy Annex. So this is seemingly really good because I get to open up the Ritual Chamber for one thing. I am debating if I should attack with everything here, but I'm thinking yes, even though they have the Ang. They will be able to get rid of my Soulstone Sanctuary, but again, I can get in for 1 point of damage, right? So I can put them to 1. Now, what I didn't realize here, though, is that if you exile the Soulstone Sanctuary with an Ang or an airbending ability, it just goes away. And it's because airbending is cast, and you can't cast a land. So that's actually really interesting, right? Airbending can be used to just remove a Soulstone Sanctuary or remove a Restless Reef or whatever, any of those creature lands. So that was actually pretty cool that that the airbending can be used to just flat out remove, you know, exile a creature land. But if my opponent doesn't have another flyer or a way to answer one of my flyers, and actually not even that, my opponent needs to answer the demon specifically, right? They need to remove the demon specifically because I can just open up the Unholy Annex. They start with a Cosmic Grand Zenith. They're going to attack with both creatures, and I'm not expecting that my demon's going to get removed here in some way because there's no black, so it's nowhere to run. There's no red for a burn spell or something like that. So I'm thinking that there's no issue in blocking. But I decided to block the Ang to at least get rid of the flyer. They play another Cosmic Grand Zenith. And the last card in their hand is just a land, so that was it. But it was a really interesting game. You know, even though I was way ahead in life total, my opponent was holding on, and I really had to be careful with my decisions there in the last few turns. And it did honestly feel like every little point of damage was going to matter. For one thing, with my opponent having 2 Cosmic Grands on the field, it's like, well, that could have started to swing the game in their favor, right? So this is also an interesting deck that my opponent is playing, and I'm not really sure how to sideboard against this, because this is not a deck list that I'm familiar with. It is some kind of Azorius flyer kind of mid-range thing. It's not exclusively Azorius flyers. It's definitely not Azorius aggro. And it's obviously not a control deck either. So I'm just, and it's not like auras, right, or something like that. So I'm kind of just calling this some kind of Azorius mid-range deck, and I'm not really sure what to do. I am thinking that this Strategic Betrayal is certainly not really doing much, right? So I can take that out, but I'm not really sure what else to put in. I'm considering just putting in a Nowhere to Run. It can get around like Sheltered by Ghosts and stuff like that, and it does also technically remove Ang. I decided to drop an Arch Enemy's Charm here because they do have a number of cheaper creatures. You know, they have the Floodpits Drowner, they have a Spyglass Siren, and they have obviously the Ang, and then the Margot right there in the graveyard. So it felt like playing a cheaper removal spell when I'm on the draw was the better way to go. And that's really all I'm thinking of doing. You know, I don't think Intimidation Tactics is that particularly useful. They're not necessarily a combo deck, right? And I think more than 2 copies of Duress, I might not get the value from it. So not much sideboarding here, just 2 cards. Here's my opening hand for the second game. And this looks keepable, although it's not great. If I can find 1 more land, that would be good. Or if I can get a 1-mana spell, that would also be good. My opponent's going to start with a Spyglass Siren. I did get a 3rd land. So I wanted to put stops here, just to bluff that I had something. I obviously don't, but could bluff having a Duress. So with my opponent not playing anything and holding up mana, to me that means 2 possibilities, right? It's a Normalize or it's a Floodpits Drowner. So I have two options. I can play Heartless Act or I can play Deep Cavern Bat. If it's a counter spell, then I get no value from this Deep Cavern Bat aside from getting a counter spell out of their hands, which is, yeah, I mean, that's something. If it's a Flood Pitch Drowner, then the Deep Cavern Bat gets tapped, and it might be better if you just play the Heartless Act instead. So I took a while to make up my mind here. I was also thinking that if it's Flood Pitch Drowner, if it's Get Lost, right, then by playing the bat, I at least get to see my opponent's hand. So the only thing that would not be good is a Normalize, right? So that's why I'm actually leaning towards playing the bat, just so that I can see what's in my opponent's hand, right? Just so I can get the intel. My opponent's going to play Phantom Interference, so much for that. But at least that's one less counterspell that they have. So you see this? Did you see what happened there when my opponent activated the map token? How did the lands tap? The auto tapper tapped the island. So they have a white spell in their hand. It could be Normalize or it could be Get Lost. So because of that, if it's Normalized, then playing this bat is really not going to do anything, right? Having two bats get countered just is really not good. But then if I play the Annex, it would also get countered, right? So then I'm thinking like, well, which of these spells would I rather have countered? Also, if it's Get Lost, then playing the Annex, it will just get removed. So I have a little bit of information here that my opponent has a white spell, but I don't know which one it is yet. So what I'm thinking of doing here is actually just passing, because I want to see if my opponent taps out. It's possible that they won't, right? In fact, it might be more likely that they don't. But if they do, then I can get some momentum going with the bat, seeing what's in their hand, taking that spell that could potentially get rid of my Annex or whatever. My opponent didn't play anything, not so surprising, but I can at least cast a Heartless Act on the Spyglass Siren, and then if this is a counterspell that they're holding, I might be able to bait it out, right, with the Heartless Act. That's not what happened. But I did draw another land, so now I can play the bat, and then I can play, or hold up, Shoot the Sheriff. So that's not so bad, right, even if the bat gets countered here. My opponent was holding a Normalize. So my opponent's going to play a Cosmic Grand Zenith and a Flood Pitch Drowner. I'm certainly going to remove the Cosmic Grand Zenith, but they at least got their trigger from it. And I was hoping to get a 5th land there so that I can just open up the Ritual Chamber and get that going. But, you know, now I have a decision to make here because I can play Dream Thief and the Annex, which I am considering. I might get another land then. But I'm also thinking that if I just play Bloodletter, then I have a good blocker. And then next turn, when I play Dream Thief and Annex, seemingly, I'll drain them for 4 life, right? So that's why I decided to just run out the Bloodletter instead. My opponent's going to play a Cosmic Grand Zenith. And that's it. Still no double spell. So if they had saved the first Cosmic Grand Zenith, they could have doubled with this one. But they wanted to double spell with the Flood Pitch Drowner, right? So... but either way, they didn't have a double spell this time. And now I'm thinking that I can just play this Dream Thief and play the Annex. I'll drain my opponent for 4, and then I also get to see what's on top of my library before I draw it, and it's a land, which is certainly something that I want at this point, because then I can open the Ritual Chamber. So that's what I'm going to do. Play the Dream Thief, drain my opponent for 4. And nothing from my opponent, so obviously that's a good sign for me, right? And now I'm just going to think for a minute what I want to do. Seemingly opening the Ritual Chamber is good, right? But I did just want to consider my options. Like I considered playing the LG Acolyte to be able to draw a card. And I also debated for a second not attacking with that Dream Thief and just leaving it back as a blocker. But it is 2 more damage. So this is a total of 6 damage in the air with the Bloodletter. And then it's going to be 4 damage with the Annex. So it seems worth it to do that. So much for that. My opponent played a Lagoon Breach, which is the adventure spell from Hornlock Whale. But I don't mind putting the Bloodletter on top of my library because now I'm going to draw it again right off the Annex. but they play a Phantom Interference, and they're going to make a 2/2 Flying Spirit. So this does trigger Cosmogran Zenith. So really good play there from my opponent, holding up the 2 flash spells. And now what I'm actually wondering is it better to play Elegy Acolyte? Because Void has triggered. So I'll lose 2 life off of the Annex, but then I'll gain 2 back when I play the Bloodletter on my next turn, and I'll drain my opponent for 4, right? So I'm really thinking, what is better here? To get the Demon or to play the Acolyte and get the token? I figured that with my opponent having this wide board, the token might actually be better and the Acolyte for the lifelink. But that was really interesting. This is such a good match, y'all. Like, seriously, I have to just pause for a second here and just say, this is beautiful Magic. This is so freaking good. Look at what my opponent just did. Look at how good that play was. To bounce my Bloodletter and then cast a 2/2 Spirit as a blocker, trigger the Cosmogran Zenith. This is just awesome. This is the kind of Magic that I enjoy. This is when I think Magic is at its best, instead of people just playing solitaire and doing broken combos and just kind of not interacting with each other in some way, or not bouncing off of each other in some way, you know? So my opponent is going to play the Whale, and once again, I'm presented with an interesting option. You know, do I play the Bloodletter or do I open up the Ritual Chamber? Because I can't really attack into this, right? And the Demon is a much better, the Ritual Chamber Demon is a better blocker. It could potentially block that Whale. So I'm wondering if I should just do that instead, even though it's not mana efficient, right? That wouldn't be the mana efficient line. So I'm going to run out the Bloodletter instead. And the reason why I did that is in case I draw a removal spell off of the Annex. I didn't. I drew another Annex, which isn't bad. But if I drew a removal spell, I could remove the Cosmogran Zenith. In retrospect, though, actually, I think maybe opening up the Ritual Chamber would have been better, because then on my next turn, I would have 7 mana, right? I could cast the Bloodletter and the Raven Eagle. So now that I'm looking at this, I actually think that might have been better to open up the Ritual Chamber and then cast Bloodletter and Raven Eagle on my next turn. So the thing is, though, that with the second Annex coming down, right, that's another 4 damage off of the Bloodletter. If I draw a removal spell for this Spirit token, then I'm going to win the game, because it's going to be it's going to be 4 damage off of Bloodletter attacking, and then it's going to be 4 damage from each Annex, right, which is a total of 12. My opponent plays a Floodpitch Drowner, and they're going to tap down my Elegy Acolyte. Really smart play from my opponent. And then they're going to attack with everything. So I think attacking with everything was a bit of a mistake, because they need to have that, they should have that Spirit token back as a blocker, right? What they are going to do here, seemingly, is use the other Floodpitch Drowner, the one with the ++1 counter on it, to shuffle away my Elegy Acolyte. See, that's why I took away the block on the Acozots, on the Bloodletter, because they're going to shuffle away that Floodpitch Drowner, and it seemed better. Let me just make sure that this 2/2 flying token gets off the field, just in case I don't win on my next turn, which it certainly seems like I am, because I can just swing for 4 in the air with Bloodletter, and then I have the 2 Annexes, right, to drain them for another 8 damage. So really, though, up to this point, I think my opponent here, the Duke, has been playing really well, and it's been really interesting. But attacking with that 2/2 Spirit was a mistake, because they left themselves wide open. So now my Bloodletter can get in for damage. My opponent is going to shuffle away the Elegy Acolyte, but it doesn't matter, right? I have lethal damage this turn. I'm going to play stuff out just to kind of show them what's in my hand, but you know, I don't need that Soulstone Sanctuary. It doesn't even matter, right, what it was, but play the other Annex, and I'll play the Raven Eagle. And I'm kind of doing this out of courtesy, just to show them what I had in my hand, but it's obviously lethal damage, right, if I just attack with the Bloodletter and have the Annexes. So, but that was such a good game. Like, I love these types of games that are back and forth, where you have to be really careful with your decisions. And really, I think my opponent played really well, except for that one mistake with attacking with the Spirit. All right, here's my opening hand for the first game of the second match. It's not that great, but it is keepable. I could potentially surveil with Fairy Dream Thief here to find a land. And there's a Bloodletter on top. I'm just going to put that in the bin. It's more important that I hit my land drops here with 2 annexes in hand. And my opponent is seemingly playing Boros tokens or some kind of Boros aggro or with Stadium Headliner. So I'm certainly going to play this Swamp, but I'm pausing here because I don't know if I want to play this Duress or actually Strategic Betrayal. Strategic Betrayal seems like at this point it's not really that much value. But still, I mean, if I remove this Stadium Headliner, that's like a primary removal piece, right? Because they can use it to do damage to me based on the number of creatures, or damage to one of my creatures based on the number of their creatures. So I did debate for a second using a Strategic Betrayal on the Stadium Headliner, but I decided to go for the Duress instead. Duress it's not only about being able to have them discard a card, it's the information, right? Seeing what's in their hand. So actually my opponent didn't play the Voice of Victory there, so they might be afraid that I'm holding removal and I just have 3 annexes in my hand. So I'm just going to run one of these out because they have 2 Get Lost, right? But I don't care. Like, use the Get Lost on my annex. I have 2 more. So that's why I was like, all right, just go ahead and destroy one of my things. I got more as a backup, so... I also am not attacking with the Dream Thief because I want to leave it back as a blocker for this Stadium Headliner, obviously. So it doesn't seem worth it to me to attack with this Dream Thief and do 1 damage when I could use it to block one of their more threatening creatures in the form of the Headliner, right? So they're still holding Get Lost. So now I'm wondering, you know, what to do with this. I kind of do want to use Strategic Betrayal now, because now since I have the map tokens, I can trigger Void off of the Tragic Trajectory. So if I get rid of the Stadium Headliner and then they play Voice of Victory, especially if I get a 4th land, then I can play the or no, that's not right. I won't have enough mana to do that. But I'm still considering using the Strategic Betrayal because I can use the map token combined with the Void from the Tragic Trajectory. So I can at least use one of these map tokens to see if I find a land. And there's a Deep Cavern Bat, so I am thinking of leaving that on top actually instead of getting the 3rd or the 4th land. It does feel like that bat, it would provide some value here. So again, I am considering using Strategic Betrayal on this Stadium Headliner because I can just play the bat next turn and then take one of their things, or if they play Voice of Victory, then I can just cast or use the map token on my Dream Thief again and trigger Void to get rid of it with Tragic Trajectory. Still nothing from my opponent. So it seems like what they're doing is they're holding back the Cosmic Grand Zenith and the Voice of Victory to try to double spell. And they're going to Get Lost my bat. And that is what they're doing. They do have a 5th land in hand. So that's actually a little scary, right? Because they're gonna get a trigger with the Cosmic Grand Zenith off of this. So I can at least activate the map token. I do hit my land, and then I can activate another map token, right, and see what else I get. And then I still have a 3rd map token to trigger Void if I want to, and I got another land. So on my next turn, I will have 5 mana. I can activate the map token, Tragic Trajectory, and play Unholy Annex. So it's a little scary, right? It's a little scary that they get to double spell it, but it might not be such a big deal because for one thing, they're down to 14 life, right? I've done some damage. And look, I mean, I've got good stuff going on here. Now, I drew an LG Acolyte, and I was about to play it. It was like, oh, wow, I get to trigger Void. But then I had to stop myself because I was like, wait a minute, I need to remove this Cosmic Grand Zenith, right? And unfortunately, I don't have 6 mana to be able to play the LG Acolyte, activate the map token, and cast Tragic Trajectory. That would be great because then I could get the 2/2 robot. But I can't do all that stuff, so... I'm just going to bin that Fairy Dream Thief. I can exile it from the graveyard and draw a card, so no reason to... I still get value from it, right? And then I'm going to cast the Annex, and then I'm actually going to leave back this 3/3 Fairy Dream Thief as a blocker. So it was good that it was a non-land card on top, because now this Dream Thief can block the Voice of Victory. So even though my opponent did have a big turn there with the Cosmic Grand Zenith, it might not really matter too much, right? You know, I've kind of dealt with their biggest threat, and I have a higher life total, and now I have my Annex on the field. So they played an Anim Pakal, right? Or is it Pakal? It's Pakal, right? I forget. So now they get their gnome token, right? But it's a little scary because they can also attack with the other human token and get another one. And now I need to kind of decide what I'm going to do here, right? I can play LG Acolyte and play Deep Cavern Bat, and then I'll have a 4/4 lifelinker. Or I can open up the Ritual Chamber, right? Get the demon, and then drain them for 2 and gain me 2 life. So I'm also wondering if I should attack with this Fairy Dream Thief, because is that 3 damage going to matter? Right? Is that 3 damage going to matter here? Or is it better to hold it back as a blocker? If you do the math, they take 2 off the annex, they go down to 12. So next turn I do 9 in the air, and there's 2 more off the annex to live with 1 life. So I might not want that, right? I might not want them to live with 1 life. So it does seem like I should get in for this 3 damage, because next turn the game is over, right? If they don't kill me this turn, or if they don't get rid of my demon. They play an Enduring Innocence. They attack with a human. So they get another 2 gnomes, and they get to draw a card off of the Innocence. And I'm just not going to block here because I don't want to put this demon at risk at all, right? This is how I'm going to win this game. They play a land and a Sharpshooter. So thankfully, I have Bitter Triumph, right? Bitter Triumph will get rid of the Sharpshooter, and then I can just swing for lethal. So that was a pretty interesting first game, though, right? You know, I was stuck on 3 lands for a little bit, but the Deep Cavern Bats did make a difference, and I had 3 annexes. But the you know, the map tokens that my opponent gave me actually kind of ended up helping me, right? So I can get rid of the Strategic Betrayal, and because they're running a tokens deck, I'm gonna put in the 2 Day of Black Suns, which makes sense. You know, I can just say X is 0, and then I can get rid of all their tokens. So get rid of the Heartless Act, because there are things that put ++1 counters on stuff, right? So at least there's a few things. And then just playing Nowhere to Run and cutting an annex. You know, this is a fairly straightforward sideboard, I think. Just play a bit more removal. The Nowhere to Run gets rid of Voice of Victory, gets rid of the Sharpshooter, right? And then putting in the Black Suns as sweepers for all of the tokens. It doesn't really feel worth it to put Intimidation Tactics in here. You know, they're on the play, and their creatures are kind of cheap. So I might not be able to get one of them with the tactics before they play it. And I'm going to put in Archenemy's Charm here because of Enduring Innocence, right? They obviously have multiple Enduring Innocences in their deck, so it might not make a difference. But if I happen to get the Archenemy's Charm and they happen to have an Innocence, then I can exile it, and the Innocence doesn't come back. Instead of having 3 Bloodletters, which I wasn't too sure about, right? I think in this case, the Acolyte is slightly more valuable than the Bloodletter because of the lifelink, and it's also a 4/4 body, which is hard for them to get through. So it's a fairly straightforward sideboard. You know, I did change a good amount of cards, but that's what felt like a good approach going up against this Boros deck. Here's my opening hand for the second game. It's a little bit questionable, but I decided to keep it because I'm on the draw, so I get 1 more chance to get a land, and then I also have Fairy Dream Thief to potentially surveil for a land. So that's what I'm going to do. I drew the Archenemy's Charm off the top. There is a Soulstone Sanctuary. I would have much rather preferred if it was a swamp, right? But it is a land, so because of the Fairy Dream Thief, I was able to keep that hand, even though I only had 1 land. I wouldn't have kept it if I was on the play, though. It's only because I was on the draw. So my opponent has a Sharpshooter and a Nesting Bot. This is actually kind of tough for me because I can't attack through the Sharpshooter, and then the Nesting Bot becomes another creature, right, when it dies. So the reason why I decided to play the Bat here, though, is because I don't need to remove the Sharpshooter on this turn. I can wait a turn, and then I can Nowhere to Run on the Sharpshooter. Let me see what's in their hand first to get rid of that, and I got a Delny, which is good, and then I can Nowhere to Run on the Sharpshooter. Unfortunately, they played a Stadium Headliner, so now they're just going to remove my Deep Cavern Bat and get their Delny back. So I am still thinking of casting Nowhere to Run on the Sharpshooter because I can at least get in for damage with the Fairy Dream Thief. Because blocking with the Fairy Dream Thief doesn't seem that great right now. They're going to sack the Stadium Headliner, so I don't have to worry about that. And if I trade with the Nesting Bot, then they get their token anyway, and I just lose my creature. So it felt like getting in for the 1 damage was worth it, but unfortunately they get their Delny back. I do have a lot of... Look at my hand though, right? I got tons of removal. So I'm not really that worried as long as I can get the third land, right? If I can just get a third land, I do need a third black though for the charm. But still, if I can just get some lands, then I should be doing pretty okay. No land, just another Fairy Dream Thief. And this is really tough. Just think about it. Do I value surveilling with that Dream Thief to try to get the next land? Or do I value getting rid of that Voice of Victory, right? I decided to get rid of the Voice of Victory because that's effectively 3 damage coming in next turn, right? And with the Delny, it would trigger twice. So that's why I did that. I won't be able to remove the Delny with the stab or whatever if the Voice of Victory is on the place or on the field. But that Fairy Dream Thief would have been really nice to surveil for my next land, right? So here comes Delny. And if I get another black source, I can do both Dream Thief and stab, but I didn't get it. So this is just tough. I'm getting a little screwed over this whole match, right? The first game, I was stuck on 3 lands for a while. And look at this. Look at how many cards I've drawn without getting a third land, right? So it just, at this point, it did feel like I should play the Dream Thief to see if I finally get the land. And it finally, right? I'm finally there. It's a little bit late. But now I can double block Delny, right? So it didn't feel necessary to play stab on Delny. The nesting bot, you know, it doesn't have it doesn't have an attack trigger. It has a death trigger, right? So, and that's also why I'm not going to block it, because they would get 2 tokens. They would get 2 tokens off of the Delny. So I'm going to duress to see what's in their hand. And it seems like it's something that they can play. And it is. It's a get lost. So I got that out of the way. And now I can, at least, I don't have to worry about them get lost in my annex, right? And now I'm going to get rid of the Delny. And then I can surveil here, or not surveil, I can explore, right, with the map token. There's another annex on top. I don't want it, right? I want to try to get another black source for the Arch Enemy's Charm to get rid of the Innocence, right? To get rid of Enduring Innocence. They play an Arabella, so that's certainly scary, right? And the Lightstall Inquisitor, man. So I don't want to get rid of the annex. I'm thinking of just getting rid of this Arch Enemy's Charm, because if I draw another land, I'm just going to play it, right? Regardless if it's 4 or 3 mana, so. My opponent didn't attack there, and I found a Tragic Trajectory, which it's actually not bad, because then I can crack the map, and then it triggers Void, right? So, and there's a Deep Cavern Bat on top. I don't need it. My opponent has no cards in hand, and now I'm going to get rid of the Arabella. And now the Dream Thief is a 3/3, right? This Dream Thief, man, is just getting big out here. But I've just been stuck on lands. So I was a little bit confused by this attack, but it felt like they were just trying to get in for damage, right? I would find it surprising if they had something that would move. And even if my Dream Thief died, I wouldn't have necessarily cared, right? So now I finally have the 4th land, and more importantly, a 3rd black source. So I'm thinking of just using the Arch Enemy's Charm on the Enduring Innocence, and then I can just hold back Dream Thief as a blocker against the nesting bot. So I've still been able to stabilize, right, despite both games, getting a little bit short on lands. This one worse than the other one. But I just had tons of removal, and I had answers to what they were doing. So my opponent's going to attack with the bot, and I'm going to block, but I'm going to remove the Innocence first, right, before damage. So that way they don't get the draw card off of the death trigger from the nesting bot. I'm actually confused as to why they attacked there. So they just play a land, and I drew a Bloodletter of Akhlazotz, which is really interesting. I think that's the better thing to do, because now I can hit for 6, and then next turn I can drain them for 4 off of the annex, and that will actually be lethal, right? Actually, it's just lethal in the air right now because it's 10 damage. And that's it. They didn't have an answer for the Bloodletter, so pretty interesting match there against the Boros tokens, huh? Winning despite being short on lands. All right, here's my opening hand for the first game of the 3rd match. I kept it kind of quickly, but it's actually not really that good, right? Because it's decent, but you know, having the 2 lands and no surveil. But I was on the draw, right? So I knew I was on the draw, and I could get possibly another land there. And with them paying a cash grab, I thought initially, oh wait, this is Sultai Reanimator, right? But it's not, because they have Flood Farm Verge. So this is Bant Kona, right? It's Bant Kona. So if I look at this hand, you know, the next spell that they could play is Voice of Victory or Roiling Dragonstorm, obviously. But It felt like I should probably take the Voice of Victory because I just like the last match, that's 3 damage coming into me, right? And then it also prevents me from playing spells on their turn, so I won't be able to remove a Kona when it comes down. So the Jill I can possibly deal with. You know, I have Tragic Trajectories. If they bounce my Bat, so be it. I can just replay it. But I'm certainly just going to hold up removal here in case they do play Kona. No reason to not run out this Fairy Dream Thief. I still have mana for Shoot the Sheriff. And there's another Bat on top. So, again, a little short on lands, right? I'm going to miss a land drop, but that Deep Cavern Bat is really important, right? I can take the Omniscience or whatever. If they have a Kona, I can take that. Well, they don't have a Kona seemingly because they didn't play it, but it's also interesting that my opponent just didn't play anything. So I'm going to take another look at their hand. And if they have a Kona, then I can just take it with the Bats. And if they bounce it with Jill, then they can't play the Kona that turn, right? So my opponent's going to consult the star charts. And they did grab a Kona there, so I'm certainly just going to take it. And now they have to take a turn to bounce it with Jill. And then I can remove the Jill with Tragic Trajectory, and then I can hold up Shoot the Sheriff. They start with Voice of Victory, and then there's the Jill. So if I get a 4th land, I can remove everything on their board and hold up Shoot the Sheriff, right? Because I have 2 Tragic Trajectories. Unfortunately, no 4th land. This is like 3 games in a row, right, when I've gotten short. It doesn't make any sense, man. I have 25 lands in this deck. 25 lands, and I can't, you know. I'm missing land drops, but whatever. I'm going to take the Kona again. And at this point, you know, my opponent's running a little dry, right? They don't have anything else that they can draw with. And so they play a Cash Grab, and they found a Kona. So here it comes, right? They have a breeding pool there. They can shock that in, and then they can play the Kona, and then they can put the Omniscience on the field. So there wasn't much I could do about it, right? I think I played this the way that I should have. So there's the Kona, and they're going to tap it and put the Omniscience into play. So now we just have to see what that last card in their hand is. There's the Omniscience, and it's another Omniscience. So it's actually not too bad, right? I can remove this Kona. I can also remove the Voice of Victory, and then I can just attack. And as long as they don't find a whole bunch of card draw and draw through their whole deck and find like Meringue River Region and stuff like that, right? Then I'm actually going to be able to, okay, they're just top decking. So it depends on what they have here. It's just a land, but I'm still missing lands. So with this, I got to play this Unholy Annex, right? I got to start getting lands. This is just absurd. So this game would probably just be over if I kept finding lands, right? But as it is, you know, it's still not so bad. I'm still stable. It just depends. So whatever it is in their hand there, they didn't play it. So I want to cast this Deep Cavern Bat to find out what it is. So I'm going to find out what it is, and it's just a land. So I can attack for 3 this turn, and then I have lethal damage next turn. And they didn't have anything. So despite, again, being short on lands, I just had enough answers, right? I had the Deep Cavern Bats, I had removal spells. So against Simic Kona, or actually this is Bant Kona, right? But I can certainly cut the Strategic Betrayal and the Archenemy's Charm because the Archenemy's Charm is too hard to cast. So if they get a Kona, I want to be able to remove it right away. And I'm putting in Nowhere to Run because Nowhere to Run gets around the Seriema, right? It's -3/-3, so Indestructible doesn't matter. And I'm going to put in the Intimidation Tactics. I can take out the Stab. The Stab only hits the Jill anyway, and I can just get rid of the Jill with the Tragic Trajectory. And this kind of seems like all I need. You know, I have Duress for the Omniscience. I have Intimidation Tactics for Kona. I am debating if I want to put in another Duress because I might be able to I'm more likely to get rid of an Omniscience there, right, if I have turn 1 Duress. Now, the other thing that I'm going to try to figure out is putting in this Unstoppable Slasher because Unstoppable Slasher can end the game more quickly, right? So I'm putting them on a clock. So I'm going to cut an Unholy Annex here and try to make room for a Slasher, and now I just need to cut 1 more card. So against Kona, they don't play a whole lot of creatures, right? I mean, they have the Voice of Victory and stuff like that, but If this Slasher gets in for damage, and obviously if I have Bloodletter on the field, then it's just instantly game over. But the point is that I need to go a little bit fast against this Kona deck before they're able to combo off and get the Omniscience down, right? So I have the removal spells that I need to deal with Kona. I have the cards that I need to deal with the stuff in their hands. And then I'm going to put in this Slasher to try to hopefully put them on a faster clock. Here's my opening hand for the second game. This is not going to do. I don't have a Fairy Dream Thief. Now I have a Fairy Dream Thief, right? If I had had a Fairy Dream Thief in the previous one, I would have kept it, but this is still good. You know, look at this. I have Dream Thief, Bat, Annex, Bloodletter, right? I can potentially take a Kona or an Omniscience with the Deep Cavern Bat. Obviously, it'd be nice to have a removal spell as well, but, you know, as it is, I can just start with this Deep Cavern Bats. And they have an instant spell, so it could be a... I was thinking that it could be a Consult the Star Charts. It could also be the what is it, like, oh, I forget. There's the one that's like Find a Way Out or something like that. It's the 2 mana return target permanent to its owner's hand. It's from Murders at Karlov Manor. So I was thinking it could be one of those, but I figured I could still probably just safely play this bat, find out what's in their hand, and even if they return the bat to my hand, then I can just do it again next turn. So here's their hand. It's a cash grab. That's what the instant spell is. And they don't have a third land. And I am going to take this Pinnacle Starcade since it's going to wipe my board anyway if I don't. And they are going to cash grab and grab the Multiversal Passage. They put it on white, and then they play another Pinnacle Starcade. What a top deck, right? How about that? So now I'm just going to... They don't have a Kona in their hand, so I don't really need to worry too much, right? They could top deck a Kona, but... You know, look, and that would be 2 killer top decks in a row, right? But they did top deck a Sariema, so now they can go get a Kona. But I found an Intimidation Tactics. So I can also top deck, you know. My opponent's not the only one who's really good at top decking here. So I'm certainly going to get rid of that Kona. And then on my next turn, I can play one of these Bloodletters. Or open up the Ritual Chamber. And my opponent plays an Adaja. And with them discarding that Pinnacle Star Cage, it does feel safe to open up the Ritual Chamber because now they can't get rid of my token. They could return it to my hand, you know, well, they could remove it by trying to return it to my hand, but now I just have to wait and see what happens. So they just cast Coil and Catch on Meringue River Regents. And if you notice, I actually have lethal next turn, right? Because with Bloodletter, I will do 12 damage and then I'll do 4 damage off of the Annex trigger, so... Phoenix down, doesn't matter. I have lethal with just the demon and the Bloodletter. So there we go. Trigger off of the Annex, and that is the game. All right, here's my opening hand for the first game of the 4th match, and this is not going to be good enough, and neither is that one. 5 lands with 2 Bloodletters, and then 6 lands is nope. Nope. Neither of those hands are going to do. So I unfortunately have to mulligan down to 5. And I'm not going to keep the Stab and the Duress. And the Duress is a slightly better spell because I can potentially remove something from their hand. But more importantly, I can I can just see what's in their hand, right? I get the information. I'm going to Duress. And it is Sultai Reanimator. So I'm going to get rid of that Bitter Triumph. Now their hand isn't that great, at least. But they do have this Town Greeter that can fill up the graveyard and make a target for Cavero. There it is, Bringer of the Last Gift. Now I do have the Answer, which is the Raven Eagle, right, in my hand. So, not so bad. I am debating just casting this Tragic Trajectory on this Town Greeter. It's an aggressive use of it, though. I feel like I might have been able to save that, you know, because look, if I trigger Void, then I can remove pretty much anything in their deck. So, I don't know. I think I could have saved that. I think I could have saved that that Tragic Trajectory. So here we go. I'm going to exile the Bringer of the Last Gift. I did debate for a second getting rid of the Esper Origins because I was like, what if they don't Cavero next turn, right? But it seems like they would. It seemed like they would, and Bringer of the Last Gift would come in, and then Town Greeter would come back. So now they're going to Esper Origins. And this is where, I was kind of regretting not saving that Tragic Trajectory, because I could activate the Clue token, draw a card, and then get rid of the Summon Esper. So they also found an Awaken the Honored Dead. So they're going to get rid of my Eagle, but I can always exile the Town Greeter. So there's basically nothing in the graveyard. Draw a card off of the LG Acolyte and then drain my opponent for 1. And I found a Heartless Act. Here comes Awaken the Honored Dead, and they're actually going to target my LG Acolyte, which I was a little bit surprised about. The Eagles certainly counters their deck, but there's nothing in the graveyard right now, right? They get in for damage. And I found a Deep Cavern Bat, which is good. So I'm going to attack first. And in my graveyard, there's an LG Acolyte, so I'm going to exile that to get another Clue token. Now I'm going to Deep Cavern Bat, see what's in their hand. And in addition to the 2 Caveros, they have an Awaken the Honored Dead and a Tidebinder. So I'm going to take the Awaken the Honored Dead. I'm going to draw a card off of the Clue. There's no reason to not do that, right? There's nothing too threatening that can come down. There's nothing in their graveyard or my graveyard. And then I get to drain them for 1 more off of the Eagle, and then obviously draw my card. So there's a bringer of the last gift in the graveyard, man, off of the mill from the Awaken the Honored Dead. So that's it, right? The game is over. I'm not going to play this out. They have an Ardent in there too, so there's no point of playing it out at that point. So I'm certainly going to put in the 2 more Strategic Betrayals. And then I'm going to put in the Intimidation Tactics as well. I can take out the Archenemy's Charm. There's an argument to be made where I keep in the Archenemy's Charm because it does exile something and prevents it from going back in their graveyard, but it's just too slow against a deck like this that can just pop off on turn 4. If I don't have 3 swamps, then I can't cast it. So I've got my Strategic Betrayals, got my Intimidation Tactics, and I did want to put in a 3rd copy of Duress just to try to get rid of the Bitter Triumphs, the Awaken the Honored Deads, right? Because this Eagle is pretty important for me to keep around, and so is the Bloodletter as well, because it does accelerate things a little bit. So it's great if I'm like exiling all this stuff from the graveyard, but this deck is able to recover even if you do that. So they can just keep milling and milling and milling. So I do need to actually get in and finish them off once I have the upper hand. So that's why I wanted to keep in the Bloodletters, but getting rid of the Acolyte seemed like it was worth it. So I can exile one of the Caveros, but they have another one. And they also have a Heritage Reclamation, so they're just going to get rid of my Annex, right, if I ever try to cast that. I'm going to put stops on my turn just to bluff having something. My opponent just passes the turn. And now I'm wondering if I should play the Eagle or the Annex. If I play the Eagle, it just gets removed with Bitter Triumph, right? And they might have something in their hand that they want to reanimate with. So I instead decided, you know what? They're going to cast this Heritage Reclamation no matter what. They're just going to hold on to it. So I might as well just get it out of their hand now while there's no penalty for me, on this turn. Because there's nothing in the graveyard, right? Next turn, I can just play the Eagle. If they put something in the graveyard that I want to exile, I can do that. So no way around it. They're going to remove my Annex. So I might as well get it over with when it's not so detrimental. And you notice how they actually don't have black mana, right? I actually just realized that now when they played that 3rd land, that they don't have black mana. So they can't remove this bat. So they have an Into the Floodmaw, Awaken the Honored Dead, the Cavero, and the 2 Bitter Triumphs. So I'm actually thinking of taking this Awaken the Honored Dead just to kind of force them to use the Into the Floodmaw on my bat. Then when they cast the Awaken the Honored Dead and they try to mill 3 cards, I can get the Cavero back with the bat, right? If they want to do it that sequence. So I am considering taking the Awaken the Honored Dead here just to kind of, it's like, all right, well, if you're going to use your Floodmaw, use it on my bat, right? So they actually didn't do it, which I was a little bit surprised about. Right, so they just want to hold on to their Floodmaw. And they missed a land drop. And I found a Duress. So I'm certainly going to cast that, right? And I might be able to get rid of the Into the Floodmaw or get rid of the Bitter Triumph or whatever. But, if they Into the Floodmaw on my bat, I can just replay it. So here it comes. Now I'm going to cast Duress. And I'm actually thinking of getting rid of that Awaken the Honored Dead because that's what's going to fill up their graveyard. And look at that, they have a Bringer as well. So I'm going to actually take that because they're just going to Bitter Triumph, right? So if I don't take the Bringer, they're going to Bitter Triumph, put the Bringer in the graveyard. But by taking the Bringer, now they can't put it in the graveyard, right? They have to Bitter Triumph my Bat to get the Bringer back, and then they can put it in the graveyard with a second Bitter Triumph. They also still don't have black mana, so I'm getting a little bit lucky here, right? So now there's the black mana with the Jungle Hollow, but I drew another Deep Cavern Bat. So now I'm thinking of casting that and just getting rid of that Cavero as well. So now if they want to put the Bringer in the graveyard, they have to Bitter Triumph the Bat with the Bringer. Then they have to Bitter Triumph the other Bat that has the Cavero, and then they can discard the Bringer, but then I can exile it with the Eagle. So that's why I'm sequencing it this way. So taking the Cavero, and now they have to Bitter Triumph the Bat with the Bringer, and then they can Bitter Triumph and discard the Bringer to get the Cavero, but then I'm just going to exile the Bringer with the Eagle. They play a Cash Grab. Bunch of lands, but they need it. You know, they haven't had land in a little while. They got that Jungle Hollow, but they were missing land drops. They get a Swamp. Now they have double black. And they're going to wait until my turn to do this. So I have to be a little bit careful, right? Because I want them to do this. I don't want them to do this on my end step. If they do this on my end step, then I can't cast the Eagle and exile the Bringer. But look at what they're doing instead. They're targeting the one with the Cavero first. Like, why are they doing that? Now they can't discard the Bringer into the graveyard. So they just paid 6 life for that. And they could have paid 3 and then discarded and put the Bringer in the graveyard. I'm not sure if they were on to what I was doing. Like, if they think like, oh, well, if they have a Strategic Betrayal or that bird thing, then they might be able to exile the Bringer. But I don't know. I was very confused by this. And now I'm thinking of actually potentially not playing this Eagle because I want to wait until the Bringer is in the graveyard. So there's nothing in the graveyard right now, in their graveyard. But I just looked at my graveyard because I was like, oh, wait a minute. Cavero can target a creature in any graveyard. And that's exactly what they're doing. They're targeting my Bat. And so now they're going to look at my hand, and now they have a 4/4 Deep Cavern Bat. So that was a good play, but I still think, you know, without knowing what was in my hand, it would have been better to just put the Bringer in the graveyard, right? Because you can still do this. And it's also interesting that they decided to take the Tragic Trajectory instead of the Eagle. I feel like taking the Eagle there would have been the better thing, but... So I'm going to exile the other Bats from my graveyard so I can get a Clue token, and now they also can't do that little trick again, right? But now I'm wondering if I want to cast this second Eagle or draw a card. Because I don't have anything except like this Eagle is not really going to do anything, right? So I decided to draw a card, see what I get. Maybe I get removal, and it's not removal, but it is a 3rd land. So now I can play that, and then I can play the other Eagle, and I have 2 blockers. Nothing in their graveyard, nothing in my graveyard, so it doesn't matter what I exile. Nothing from my opponent, and I drew an Unholy Annex. This is awesome, because I'm going to get to drain them, not only from opening the Ritual Chamber, but I'm also going to get to drain them off of the 2 Eagles. So they're going to lose 4 life here just off of my triggers. My opponent has 7 lands, so not enough to hard cast the Bringer, thankfully. And I top decked a Bitter Triumph. So that should seal the deal. I can just pay the 3 life, get rid of this Bat, and swing for lethal. Well, this Bat copy. Swinging. Exiling the Cavero, and just checking the graveyards, but my opponent just concedes anyway. So I did recover there in the second game pretty well too. And it was, I don't know, I feel like my opponent could have sequenced that a little. It might not have mattered anyway because I had the Eagle in my hand, right? So I could have just exiled the Bringer of the Last Gift before they could reanimate it. But then they would be able to reanimate my Bat anyway. I guess the same thing would have happened, right? They would have just taken my Tragic Trajectory. So I'm actually not thinking of changing anything here in the sideboard. You know, I pretty much did it exactly the way that I needed to. Here's my opening hand for the 3rd game. This looks pretty good. Could be better. You know, I don't have any eagle or strategic betrayal or anything, but I at least have intimidation tactics. And they have an Arden, a Volgavoth, and a Town Greeter, right? So I'm wondering which of these was worse, and I feel like the Arden's worse because the Arden can attack. The demon that comes back attacks right away, right? It's a 5/5 with lifelink, menace, and all that stuff. So whereas the Volgavoth doesn't, it doesn't attack right away. Now Volgavoth is a problem, right? But it felt like the Arden was a slightly bigger threat. There's my Raven Eagle. My opponent plays Dismal Backwater. It's interesting that my opponent is playing these common level dual lands. So I'm going to cast the Raven Eagle, and I can at least get rid of the Awaken the Undead. They're seemingly going to cast into the Floodmaw here, but I don't necessarily mind because it just gives me another Eagle trigger anyway. And maybe that's why they didn't actually return it, right? Maybe that's why they didn't actually return it to my hand. So there's nothing scary in the graveyard. There's nothing in my graveyard either. They're attacking with this Town Greeter. But then they changed their mind. So now I have a decision to make. Do I play Bloodletter or do I play LG Acolyte? All right, LG Acolyte will obviously draw me a card. But I wanted to see if they cast this into the Floodmaw on my Eagle, because then it will trigger Void on the Acolyte. I could have played the Acolyte first, but they didn't actually play the Floodmaw. I was like, all right, well, maybe I'll just, if I play the Acolyte now, then they might return that to my hand. And they didn't do it, right? They're not returning anything to my hand. It felt like maybe they're saving that into the Floodmaw for my Demon token from the Annex or something like that. I don't know. I guess I could have just played that Acolyte at the start anyway, right? And if they return the Eagle to my hand, they return the Eagle to my hand, or I draw a card. But I wanted to almost like bait them into it. You know, they might not have returned it to my hand. They might have like definitely not if I played the Acolyte, right? They might, oh, I don't want to give them a robot token. So I was trying to like bait them a little bit, but they didn't take the bait. So I'm going to play the Acolyte or the Bloodletter, and now I can swing, and this is going to be a good amount of damage here. And my opponent just takes it all. So that's going to be 12 damage. And then they're going to cast a Tidebinder. So that's why they took the damage, right? So then they could counter the LG Acolyte trigger. So I do have lethal in the air next turn, because it's going to be double damage, of course, with the Bloodletter. So it's going to be 8. They can obviously cast into the Floodmaw, right? So they can into the Floodmaw, my Bloodletter or whatever. But I'm going to Bitter Triumph the Tidebinder to turn my Acolyte back online. Go to combat. Exile the Tidebinder. Get a clue token, and they just concede. The game wasn't actually over, right? Because they could have flood mod, but they decided not to play it out. So there we go, right? The deck can definitely hold its own against Sultai Reanimator. So I hope you all enjoyed that gameplay featuring Mono Black Midrange amidst all these crazy combos that exist right now in the current meta, with people cheating in Greater Hoofs and making a whole bunch of Greeters with Drunith and making tons of mana with Badger Molekup and reanimating Bringers and all this other crazy stuff. Here is just this bit of an old school deck, just pure mid-range value that is still able to keep up. And I'm sure you're wondering how the deck actually did. Here are the results. Not the craziest win rate that you'll see, but it definitely proves that this mono black deck can hang in the current meta. And I will say that while the deck is very synergistic and it has a lot of answers to the current meta, it is a little bit difficult to play. This is not an easy deck to pilot. In one game, I literally made one tiny mistake. I should have held up stab and I didn't, and that just cost me the game. My opponent beat me on that turn. So it is that kind of deck where you need to be very deliberate with all your decisions, and you need to be very careful because it can be a little bit unforgiving. There were a couple of examples in those matches you saw where the deck bailed me out a little bit, but generally speaking, that's not going to happen. You need to be very deliberate and you need to be very intentional. but it is also very satisfying when you win with this deck because you feel like you earned it. I do think there is a little bit of room for improvement here. I'm not convinced, even though I have tried a few different builds with this archetype, I'm not convinced that this is kind of the most refined version. For one thing, Bloodletter of Akazats, this is the power play. And because it's really strong in this deck, I think there's actually an argument here to be made that you go up to 4 copies of this. And maybe you only go down to 2 copies of Acolyte, even though there's synergy here with the Raven Eagle from drawing a card off this and the Void, right, for getting rid of the map token or the clue token. I still think that in the 4-drop slot, the Bloodletter is just potentially it's definitely a stronger card and it might just provide more value. So you could maybe try that instead. I feel like this Archenemy's Charm really could be something else and you just have the one Archenemy's Charm in the sideboard, but I'm not too sure of what this would be. You could potentially make room to slot both of these intimidation tactics in the main deck. That might be worthwhile because, again, hand disruption is so important in the current meta with all these decks just popping off with the combos and stuff like that. There's also an entirely different approach that you can take to this deck. So I mentioned in the deck tech that, you know, this deck isn't running cheap creatures like Cecil and Unstoppable Slasher and Sunset Saboteur, right? Like those creatures aren't really in this deck, but you could go in that direction. You could go in the direction that you're going to play a bunch of these creatures and you're going to try to get more threats down early on in the game instead of relying so much on like Bloodletter and the Annex to get you there. So I did put together a separate build that I want to show you that kind of takes that different approach. This is the other build that is a bit more creature focused and it has a slightly lower curve, although the curve isn't really that much lower because, again, Unholy Annex is really a 3-mana spell, right? And then it's a 5-mana spell. So it's not really that much lower, but it is lower. And there's just more creatures in here. It has the same group of flyers, the Dream Thief, the Bat, and the Eagle. But there's also 2 copies of Cecil, 2 copies of Sunset Saboteur, 2 copies of Vadmir. This card is potentially really good in this build because you commit so many crimes. Raven Eagle is a crime. Deep Cavern Bat is a crime. All of your removal spells are crimes. Even the targeting your opponent's creature to put a ++1 counter on it with Sunset Saboteur, that's a crime. So Vadmir could potentially grow every single turn with this deck. There's no Unholy Annex in here because I feel like the Annex, even though it's such a good card, it is a little bit taxing on the deck. Like, okay, now I need to run some demons or whatever it is, right? And if you just want to ignore all that, you know, you don't want to play a demon wall and you don't want to mess around with Bloodletter of Akazats, then you just might not be able to get the value that you want from that Unholy Annex. For what it's worth, even though Unholy Annex is one of my favorite cards in Standard ever since it got printed, I do think the card's actually being power crept out of the format a little bit. I don't think it's quite as good as it used to be because just paying 3 mana for this thing that draws you a card and loses you 2 life, that's not that good, is it? So I think that Unholy Annex, unfortunately, might be getting a little bit power crept out of the format. It just might not be that good. However, paying 5 mana for a 6/6 demon is still good. That is still really good value for the race, even though it's 5 mana a little bit slower. That's just still really good. So I actually feel like the Ritual Chamber side is potentially a little bit stronger. But if you have the Eagle on the field, or you already have a Bloodletter on the field, right, or you've already animated a Soulstone Sanctuary, then certainly opening up the Annex is good because now you can draw a card and drain your opponent and gain 2 life. This build also doesn't run the 2 copies of Duress. I took those out. It also only runs 24 lands because the curve is slightly lower. So I moved a copy of Duress to the sideboard and took out a copy of the Black Sun. Otherwise, this sideboard is basically the same. Maybe you can take out this copy of Archenemy's Charm. Actually, you know what? I'm just going to do that. I think this is the way to go. Well, actually, I don't know. Because one of the things with the Black Sun with this build is that you might not be able to get as much value from it since you're playing more 1-drops and 2-drops, right? So maybe that's not true. Maybe you want to just leave this out. But you know what? Against token decks, against token decks, you just be able to pay X = 0 and you're not playing the Annex, so you don't have to worry about the demon token getting destroyed. Maybe this is better. So I think that Archenemy's Charm is really good, but it's only good against Enduring Curiosity, Enduring Innocence, right, and stuff like that. So paying 3 mana for a removal spell, again, in the current landscape is just not that good. So this might be the better way for the sideboard, actually. And maybe you prefer this build, right? This build can still potentially do really, really well There is still a card draw with the Elegy Acolyte. You might be able to draw a card off a Preacher, and you can definitely draw cards off of the Dream Thief, right, if it ends up in the graveyard. So if the other one's not working for you, if it feels a little bit too slow, you can try this one out instead, and now you've got some other powerful creatures, right, to have on the battlefield. That wraps this one up. Again, I am very glad that I'm able to showcase this deck in my favorite color. I'm also very glad that it does seem like it can perform well in the current landscape. It might not quite be there. It might need just a few more changes to the list, even though you can put the Black Suns in after sideboarding. This deck is still very vulnerable to decks that go wide. And it makes sense that it would be vulnerable to those decks since most of the removal is just spot removal, right? There's not much mass removal aside from the Black Sun in the sideboard. If you enjoyed, then drop me a like to beat the YouTube algorithm and leave me some feedback in the comments. What do you think about the deck? Are there any other cards that you would like to potentially put in here? Would you like to change the amounts of what you see? And also, what do you think about Avatar? Personally, I think that some of the cards in that set are just really, really strong. And lastly, if you are a fan of this kind of Magic the Gathering content that gets deep into deck building, play patterns, and other aspects of the game, then subscribe to the channel to see more. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.